Hello, beautiful people, and a warm welcome to the Surrey Art School studio. It is finally time to begin our journey into plant medicine, and I could not be more excited to begin this journey with you today. So I've got a lovely little gentle and soothing tutorial in store for you. We'll be doing some soft pencil and some sketching exercises to begin with, understanding how to sketch the shape of chamomile, because we're going to be focusing on chamomile for this first cycle, and then moving into working with a couple of colours either from your pan palette or the subscription box to do some little washes of colour, and then move into a full chamomile watercolour painting. So some beautiful techniques in this first cycle, an opportunity to explore some of the colours in the subscription box for those of you that have got it, even to test out some of the paper if you like. This would be a perfect time, I would say, to crack out your chamomile tea that we've sent you, which will put you into a lovely, gentle and meditative state whilst you work. And one of the things I haven't spoken about yet that I wanted to, let's have a look and see if I can do this, is this little magnifying glass that we've sent you. So we'll be working with that a little bit later on in the season when we've got some physical plants that we can work with. But for now, it is just there for you to play and experiment with. This cycle, this season is about close observation. It's about an observation of our surroundings, so what is happening on our local patch. It's also an observation of what's happening inside us in that inner world, like how does this interaction with these different plants make us feel, and then also to learn about some of their medicinal or healing properties. So the chamomile is a deeply feminine flower. There are some lovely bits of information on the resources, sort of stories of the origins of the word chamomile and things like that for you to sink your teeth into contextually as well. And I've offered you up maybe a starting point for about 2 or 3 pages in a small sketchbook, but I recommend you leave more space at the end, either to add some of your own research, but also for when the chamomile actually comes out, which is this month of May, for you to then be able to go and collect some physical samples and work from them too. And this is where this little viewfinder will really come in handy. But yes, I'm keeping things short and sweet for this first cycle of the season. There's some lovely techniques in there which you can use sort of throughout the season. So consider them seeds that I have planted in your mind, which will be tools that you can then sort of find useful to come back to as we explore other plants later on in the season. So I don't have much more to say right now apart from let's get started, but I will meet back with you at the end of this cycle and talk to you a little bit about what to expect in cycle 2 as well, because chamomile is part of the daisy family, and actually a lot of the plants that I want to cover in these first couple of cycles are also part of that daisy family. So we're going to be continuing that journey into daisies. They may not look like daisies, but they are part of the same family as we move through the next few cycles. And do have a look on the resources as well, because on this first cycle I've given you a glossary of terms for sort of herbalism, I suppose, and also some information about how to connect with and how to connect the plants as well. So if you wanted to gather some chamomile and dry it so that you can make your own tea, this is your opportunity to do so. So let's get started, my friends, and I will see you on the other side of this tutorial. So much love. Okay, my loves, are you ready? Let's begin. So as you can see, I'm working in my octopus sketchbook for this season, and what I'm doing is I'm leaving probably 3 or 4 pages per plant, because even a plant like chamomile, you've got wild chamomile, you've got common chamomile, you've got German chamomile, so it's worth leaving a little bit of space so that you can record some of the extra information about the flower or the plant, and just give yourself space for a few different experiments. So like I said, I'm leaving sort of 3 to 4 pages here from the start of my book. Now for this first part of the tutorial, all you're going to need is a 2B pencil, a 3B if you've got it, but I quite like to sketch with a 2B, and a blender. So we're going to lean in some pencil technique first. It's a really nice way to get started. Obviously there's no chamomile out just yet, but that's okay. There's a method to my madness. The idea here is that we learn about the plant now, and then when it pops out in nature, you'll be find it so much easier to identify it, especially the wild chamomile, or the pineapple weed as it's also known. So at the moment I'm just working from images which are in the resources for this tutorial. I've got a few different pictures here that I'm working from that give me an idea of the shape of the flower, some of the colours, and this is a great place to start. And probably this image here is one of my favourite, just because the chamomile is a little bit different from, say, other flowers in the daisy family. It has a slightly more raised sort of centre, and that really defines it, and it also makes it a little bit easier to sketch than a regular daisy. So let's have a sort of little look at some of the sketching techniques we might need here. So you can see my pencil is nice and sharp, and to begin with we're going to be doing some loose sketching. Well, what we want really here is some ellipses. So when I say an ellipse, I mean like a flattened circle like this one. And you're also going to need sort of a soft, roundish shape for the centre of the flower. So to begin with, we're just going to sketch some fried eggs, if you like, or some flying saucers. And we're going to add that extra little sort of half circle popping out at the top of those saucers. Now notice how my pencil, well, my fingers don't move at all here. Everything is coming from much further up on the elbow. My hand is sort of rested on the page, and then I'm able to create these loose, sketchy lines, which is exactly what we need for chamomile. Well, exactly what we need for this kind of flower sketching, I suppose. So start by just filling your page with a few of these little ellipses and practicing putting together the sort of white of the egg with the yellow. And that is already giving us a basic sort of chamomile shape. And then once you've got this ellipse in, this also sort of gives you a guideline for where the edges of the petals are going to land. So you can see here that my sort of centre of the flower here is sticking up quite a lot, and it's sort of cutting into that circle. And so that means that in terms of the angle that I'm sketching at, that my petals will appear a little bit shorter at this part of the flower. And what that line does is it gives you a sort of container to stop you from sort of drawing your petals too long. So if I just pop a few petals in here, probably easier to see what I mean than to understand what I mean in terms of me talking. That's always the way with art. So I'm just popping in those really loosely sketched petals, and you can see with the foreshortening, the petals get a little bit shorter at the back. And then once we've got that in, we can come back and we can redefine that sort of top of the flower. Now if the petals are really sort of open and flat, you'll have a fairly flat ellipse. If the sort of flower is a little bit more open, I'll just do this again. The flower is a little bit more open, just notice where the petals are landing. Then you may find that your petals are sort of curving out like this. And I don't think the actual centre of the petals actually touches, so just pay attention to that in your pictures, in the pictures that you're looking at. So here we can see the petals sort of drooping down from that top, but the same rule still applies in terms of the sort of foreshortening of the petals. The ones that are further away are going to be shorter, but you don't need to do measurements here, you just use that ellipse to help you. So can you see that chamomile flower already emerging from what was essentially just what looked like a fried egg to begin with? So have a go at sketching a few of those. Just look at the images, do a few shapes, play around with changing the angle on that ellipse. So this one, for example, would be viewed right from above, and then pulling out just very loose shapes of the petals and noticing how that ellipse helps you to sort of keep things contained, keep things in proportion. So I recommend filling at least half a page with sketches, and then I'll meet you back here, okay? Okay, so if you've got a few sketches down, that's great. We've got the line element, which means we've got the edges of the flower, we've got the edges of that centre, we've got the edges of the petals. We're starting to get a sense of the proportion. Now what we need is some tone. So for that, we're going to use our pencil in a slightly different way. We're going to be holding our pencil on its side like this, and what we're going to do is gently rub at the page. Now you want to watch, especially if you've got a very pointy pencil, you want that absolutely horizontal to the page, and so it's just rubbing softly. So just do a few little rubs, and if you're doing it right, you shouldn't really get lines. What you should get is a nice soft grain on the side from the side of your pencil. So this is where the sort of tonal element of this drawing exercise comes in. So just do a few little rubs for me. Get maybe a slightly longer line of tone coming out from one side to the other. Just get comfortable with that. You'll notice that I do hold my pencil in a weird way, but my little finger, it's just sort of making sure that that all stays steady. So underneath my hand, you can see my fingers reaching round to make a nice flat surface so that I can create that soft tone. So this is tone, not line now, okay? And once you've got a little bit of tone down, you can use a blender just to soften and to push the sort of graphite from the pencil into the tooth of the paper. That's why we do it. Soften it off, blend it off. And I've got two different blenders here. I've got, this is sort of a traditional pastel blender, I suppose, but it can be used for pencil and it's made out of cardboard. And this one is a tortillon, which is a slightly more delicate blending tool, and it's made out of a rolled up piece of paper. Literally a tortillon in French just means a roll up. So have a go with both blenders and make some notes on your page. We're here to develop creatively. So what you're going to do is you're going to start at the dark area, rub and pull away, and see when it is that the pencil completely disappears. So what we're doing is we're softening off some of that grainy tone that we've just put down and seeing how far we can stretch what's left on the blender. So, I'll try both blenders, but they should work in exactly the same way. And FYI, if your pencil blender gets really manky like this, just get a bit of sandpaper, rub it on the sandpaper, and it should soften it off for you. I can see there was a bit of pastel in that one because I can see a bit of colour appearing, and I think there might have been a bit of charcoal on this one. So use your blenders, not my used ones. Okay, so how does that then translate to the chamomile? Well, what I'm going to recommend that you do this time round when you draw is this. We're going to start with that loose sketch from the centre of the flower. Make it a little bit bigger this time. So I'm making a sort of almost like a cone shape. I'm really accentuating it for this. Each chamomile plant will be slightly different, but I'm really accentuating it for this so we've got enough space to work. So I've made it quite big. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start on the sort of dark side. So I'm imagining my light is coming from here. That's my light source. Draw a little sunshine for you. Yes, that's art too. And so then what I want is, that's going to be the strongest light, that's going to be the lightest area. I want my tone coming in on the side here. So make sure your pencil is on its side. You can press quite heavily in the darkest part. And what we're trying to do is sort of wrap the shadow from the shadow side towards the light. So put the pencil down first, and then we're going to use our blenders to push towards the lightest area. And we're doing this sort of U-shaped movement here because we're gradually moving towards the light. Okay, so there may be a bit of light on the top as well, but don't worry about that for now. So we're just pushing from the darkest area towards the lightest. And if we want to, we can then really go back in and accentuate that. So we can make this area a little bit darker by adding a little bit more graphite. Works really well on this paper, but it works really, really well on rough paper as well because it picks up the surface of the rough paper. So I will do a little study, well, I'll include a little study on Bockingford rough. So there we go, there's the centre of the flower done, and you can see it's that dance between the light and the shadow that makes it appear 3D, which is what it's doing now. Now we need to put the petals in, so I'm going to sketch over the top of that, just to put in my ellipse. Ellipses are loose. You can do multiple marks. You really don't need to worry about it looking perfect. It's just a guideline. So down here around the base of the petals, there is going to be a little bit more shadow. So I'm just going to add that in. Just at that point where the petal and the sort of center of the flower meet, I'm just going to add a little bit more shadow there. And then we're going to start to pick out those petal shapes. So again, it's those same sort of lovely, sort of loose shapes. I don't know what shape to describe them as other than a petal shape. And we're working those all the way around to the back. using that ellipse as a nice little guideline for proportion, making sure that we don't draw our petals too big. There we go. And actually that little bit of dark is slightly distracting me, so I will focus for a second. So just purling out those petal shapes, lovely, and you can see that little bit of shadow now sitting on those. And then in terms of marks on the petals, there's a few things you can do. Quite often they're sort of eaten away at a little bit, they're rips, so you can sort of come back in and reshape some of them so that they look a little bit more organic, a little bit less perfect. And then you can add lines to the surface of the petals if you like, for a nice clean, crisp look. You can also add little circular marks, they look a bit like this, to that center of the flower, just to give it a little bit more texture over the top, and especially in those shadow areas. But you could also just take what's left on your blender and you could sort of rub it down the petals, and that will give you a nice bit of soft shadow. The best way that we can do something like a white flower is with a little bit of grey. So this is where this tonal work comes in, and then I can work those extra directional lines across the top, and that sort of starts to give us the shape of the petal as well. Okay, so we've done the flower head, we've done the centre of the flower, lots of experimentation to do there in terms of sort of sketching from different angles, and you can have a play around with that, and I'll make sure there's some nice examples on the resources, but that's the basic technique. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to speed it up. I'm going to use some Bockingford rough paper, which I was saying to you has a nice texture, and I'm going to draw a couple of chamomile onto that, and that's going to go on this page here. So I'm sort of planning my pages as I go along here as well. So have a little play and experiment with doing that flower head. Have a go at just sort of sculpting the flower head, just using the side of the pencil to find that top shape. And just work your way through that process, familiarise yourself with it. This is not just a skill that we'll use during this cycle, this is something that will translate into all the future cycles. So I'm planting seeds here in terms of sketching techniques, which I think you will find useful for the whole season, okay? Okay folks, so same materials, and I'm using this image here to work from. But I've got some Bockingford rough paper here. It doesn't have to be Bockingford rough, but watercolour paper is really good because it's got a nice surface or texture, and it really picks up the pencil, as you'll see. So I'm going to speed this up for you now, but I'll stop at the end because I haven't talked to you about stems yet, and I figured out a really good thing to do with stems. So I'm actually going straight in with my pencil on this one, so I can pick up some of that lovely texture. I'm starting from the dark side, just rubbing with my pencil, and then I'm going to blend it off again. And then the petals. So again, you can sketch that ellipse just to help you here. The petals radiate out from the centre of the stem in all directions, so just watch out for that. Let's add a little bit of tone to those flowers. Whilst we're here as well, we can go in and cut in at the ends a little bit, just to make these petals look a little bit more natural. A little bit of blending. And then for the stem, just get your pencil, find the centre of the flower, and pencil on the side to find that stem shape. Always a bit of a wobble in the stem, so. And what's nice about having this on watercolour paper is it means that you can then add some colour if you want to afterwards. So I'm going to carry on and do a couple more from different angles. There's a nice big one here, let's pop that in. Little rubber here just to tidy up the drawing afterwards, get rid of any of those guidelines. Also can be used to create a little highlight if you've gone a bit too dark. Okay, so there we have it, a couple of little chamomile stems on some nice watercolour paper that will fit perfectly into my sketchbook. So if you wanted to, you could sort of journal, you could free write some of your thoughts and feelings about chamomile into the background, or some of the research that you might have found in the resources as well. That could be written in the background just in pencil. It's a really nice way of sort of integrating your research with your page and with your sort of visual commentary, I suppose. So free writing is just you pick up the pen and you just write for as long as you humanly can. And that's a nice little technique which I'll come back to a few times during this journey. But I'm feeling, as this little pencil study is on watercolour paper, it's a nice opportunity for us to start to play with some colour and some paints as well. So you've got your colours from your subscription box. If you haven't got them, I'll guide you as to what colours you might need from your regular pan palette. But we've got this nickel azo yellow, which is beautiful, and we've also got serpentine genuine, which is a nice green for the stem and the background. So we can work with those today. And then this is my regular pan palette from Surrey, and we'll be using mostly just that lemon yellow and maybe some of these warmer yellows as well, just to sort of give that richness of the chamomile yellow. So, and I meant to talk about the medicinal properties of chamomile in the last clip, but I forgot. I got really into the technicals, so I'm going to do that now as well. So I've got a size 6 synthetic, well no, mine isn't actually, but a size 6 brush will do for this job. This one's not synthetic, it was a special one that my partner got me for my birthday, but it is a size 6. And to begin with, you just want a little bit of this lemon yellow. So everybody should have at least a lemon yellow in their pan palette. Add some water to it, get it going, and then put it out onto your palette like this until you've got a nice mix. So it needs to be sort of fluid, and you want to load your brush up with it. And then we're just going to drop a little bit of that over the top of that sort of centre of the flower. Okay. All the technical words about the names of bits of flowers have fallen out of my head this morning. That is pretty normal when I'm when I'm sketchbooking, but it is quite funny, isn't it? So look at that lovely cool yellow tint that we've popped on there already. They already look more daisy-like, more chamomile-like. And then if you go to your serpentine genuine and you just drop in a little bit of water like this and just give it a minute to soften, then that will create a really nice sort of nice backgroundy colour for us as well, and I'll show you how to put that down in a second. But chamomile is used as a sort of mild sedative. It's been used for thousands of years. It's a recognised medicine. It's not one of those, ooh, we think it's medicinal but we don't really use it. Chamomile is a recognised medicine across cultures. As well as being a mild sedative, it's really good for the belly, it's really good for the gut, it's good for digestion. So a nice thing to take, or sort of take in a tea after dinner, for example, to soothe your digestive tract. And yeah, it's just such a beautiful, soft and gentle flower, and that's why I love it so much. So here you can see my serpentine genuine is sort of soft and it's going now. We've got a nice mix there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop a little bit of it down on the page like this. And you could just do this, you know, pointing your brush towards the tricky bits of your plant. You could just put down a little wash like this. Be really careful in the areas where you've popped the yellow, because if that's still wet, it will bleed in. Or you can pop down a little bit of colour and then just add water to it. And what you do is you pull away from the heavily coloured area, and that'll give you a nice soft wash. But it's quite nice to have a sort of stronger mix towards the side of the plant. So I won't do all of this with you, but it's a really nice way of filling your pages as well, making them look a little bit richer, a little bit fuller, is to add some washes in the background as you work. If I just press on the heel of my brush there, it'll stop that paint from sort of going over my lovely white petals, so to speak. So a really nice way of sort of working into the page once your sketch is done. Totally optional, but it does give you a chance to sort of have a play with some of the colours that we've got going on this season. And this serpentine genuine is such a beautiful colour. We used it in the autumn. We love our Daniel Smith paints over here. They are fantastic for the kinds of painting that we do at Sketchbook Club. And yeah, if you want to test a little bit of it out and see what it really does, what you want to do is put some water down like this. So this is just water. Take a bit of your paint, the sort of stronger bit, and just drop it in. And watch it move and flow. This is why we love these paints. So it's a chance for you to have a little bit of a play, to sort of experiment with the paints as well. And when you drop it in wet on wet like this, the paint splits into all the sort of pigments that make up the colour. And it's mind-blowing, especially the Daniel Smith paints. The Sennelier paints I'm working with on my paint palette are also really good for wet on wet. That is a process that I work with a lot. I'm not much of a glazer. I love a bit of wet on wet. It's soft, it's loose, it's beautiful. And it's something I was introduced to many moons ago by my pal Jane Davis, and how grateful I am to her. We are all teachers for each other. So there we go. We have a nice sort of slightly fuller, richer page now. This is a bit flat, this yellow at the moment, so it needs a little bit of oomph. And what I recommend for that is having a play with this new yellow we've got. Look at the colour on that. It's a random one, but I'm going to share it anyway. So there's a particular yellow which is made by cow's wee. I learnt this when I was teaching colour in to my year 7s actually, years ago. And they eat mango leaves, and it makes their wee really bright yellow. And it creates a particular kind of yellow. There you go, didn't know that, or if you did, then now you will really remember it. So see that warmth there? We want a little bit of that warmth on this chamomile. So I would go towards the sort of, I'd start at the darker area actually, add a little bit in. If your paint's still a little bit wet, it's just a little bit, a hint. If your paint's still a little bit wet, then it'll blend really nicely. And just popping that on top just to give it a little bit of extra oomph. And actually what you can do here, so you can remember what paints you work with, is just pop a little bit of that nickel azo yellow. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? A little bit of this lemon yellow, just samples, and a little bit of this serpentine genuine onto the page. And then when that's dry, you can label it up, and it just means if you're coming back to this process at any time, you know exactly what materials you've worked with. One last little thing, which is that we can colour the stem as well. It's got a little bit of bleed there, but I quite like it. So I've got a really little brush. This is a size 2, I think. And if I just load up with a little bit of that thicker paint, I can actually go back over. My paint's a little bit wet here. You might want to wait till yours is dry, but if you know me, it's always a do as I say, not as I do. I like to crack on. I'm just going to add a little bit of a hint of colour to that stem. And even over here, I can make like a little mark just to show that that is sort of the thickness of the stem. And brushes are great for doing stems. I hate drawing stems, but I love painting them. So just do a little test up there just to warm up if you like before you start. Okay, that's all done. We're going to move on to a more pure watercolour process now. That'll maybe be the last one in this cycle. We'll see how much time I've got. But already we've got some pencil studies, we've got some sketching technique, and we've got a little bit of watercolour. And this is how I teach. If you're new to Sketchbook Club, I'm going to give you options on each of the plants that we look at, different ways that you can record them. And in so doing, in exploring those options, that will help you find your style, the techniques that resonate with you, and that'll be different for all of us, okay? I am here to teach you on a very individual level. I want to help you to discover the areas which you find the most enjoyable about art, and so I will always have a lot of variety in terms of materials and processes to share with you in each of these cycles. All right, I'm going to have a quick pause, reset and a cup of tea, and meet me back here with just a small sheet of 300 GSM watercolour paper. We're going to paint some chamomile flowers now, which will be lots and lots of fun, trust me. Okay folks, nearly there with chamomile. So this last little bit, we're going to just do some full chamomile painting. And again, colours wise, all you really need is your sap green from your normal pan palette, your lemon yellow, and this, which is a much warmer yellow, okay? That's all you're going to need. Oh, yes, and maybe a little bit of either Payne's grey or something like that that's really washed out. If you've got the subscription box, it's this middle colour here, which is Shadow Violet, that we're going to use just for the petals. Because as I said before, when you've got something like a white petal or something white, then using a little bit of grey can really help to find that shape. So we're going to start by just doing the flower head. So if we think back to these original images here, thinking about one like this one here, where you've got this sort of shadow on one side, it's much brighter on the other. So we'll work on that first, just that flower head shape. And in terms of a brush, again, I'm just using a size 6 brush. This is a slightly different one. It's called Black Velvet, Silver Black Velvet, but essentially any size 6 brush will do for this. I just really like this brush. So I'm going to zoom you in a bit, just so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing here. There we go, that's a little bit better. And what we're going to do to begin with is we're just going to put some lemon yellow down. So get my lemon yellow, make a sort of thinnish mix of it, load my brush up with it, and then we're just going to create that shape to begin with. So that sort of bulbous shape. I'm leaving a little bit of a gap here at the edge. So you don't want your paint too thick, you do want it still quite translucent, and I'm just leaving a little gap there, okay? Now whilst that's still wet, I can go to my much warmer yellow, which is this one here, get a little bit out in my palette, add some water to it again until I've got a nice thin mix, a sort of medium mix I suppose, and then that is going to be dropped in to this side here. Just taking a little bit of water off this. This is a little bit too wet. And what we're going to do with that yellow is just sort of circular, sort of blobbing, sort of dotting into that side. So that really pushes it into the paper a little bit, and it also gives a little bit of texture. But I've got quite textured paper anyway, as you can probably see. And then you can either use the sap green for the green elements, but I'm going to use a little bit of the Serpentine Genuine because I really like it. And this may seem a little bit strange, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a little bit of that greeny tone just into the opposite side. So you've got light, you've got shadow. Just a little bit there, just a little hint. That gives a really nice little range of tones. If it goes too strong, too heavy, just clean your brush. You can always lift it out again. This Serpentine Genuine really wants to move, okay? And then we're going to do some petals now. So I'm going to take my Shadow Violet, drop a little bit of water onto it, so it's really, really, really thin, this, really, really, really sort of pared back. You could take a tiny bit of green and mix it with it, tiny, tiny bit. This is the cool stuff, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to start to find those petal shapes, and it's okay if the paint sort of merges into them a little bit. So I'm going to go down first, and then I'm going to come back up. Okay, so super subtle stuff this. Super, super subtle. Let's do another one. And you can, like I said, you can touch. So go down, come back up, leave a little gap. And it's okay if a bit of that colour merges in, all right? And just keep going like that. Nice thin mix of the grey. Purling down from that centre. And then pushing back up to create the petal shape. Now obviously you need to be a little bit careful here. Oh, that's a bit too strong, she says. A little bit careful here not to lose the proportion. So thinking about the length of those petals, imagining that ellipse as we do this. Down again, and clean my brush a bit because my mix is a bit thick, and then pull it back up. So down and back around. There we go. That's about right, I would say, for what I would be able to see. And don't be afraid to sort of touch the edges of the petals with that colour and allow a bit of it to move in. It sort of looks a little bit more natural. And that is the flower head. Now in terms of the stem and the branches, I'm just going to show you this with, again, my size 6 brush. Getting a little bit of that Serpentine Genuine. Actually, let me bring you out a little bit so you can see a bit better now. There we go. Getting a little bit of that Serpentine Genuine, and you might want to practice this first, which is just for the stem. You want your hand nice and still, very tip of the brush, and we're just going to pull down. If we press a little bit harder, we get a thicker stem, and if we press a little bit lighter, we get a thinner stem. So practice a few of those first. Just pulling down, hand is not moving at all, fingers are not moving. I'm just tickling that brush on the paper. And then again, with all the sort of leaves of the wild chamomile, sort of getting your hand at a sort of swan neck angle, pulling out. And then from there you can fracture again. And from there you can fracture again. Lovely, lovely fractal patterns on the leaves of this chamomile. I think this is more of a wild chamomile, a pineapple weed. So whatever you fancy doing, but that will give you the leaves. So in terms of where we place that, again, the stem comes out of the centre of the flower. So we want to line ourselves up with the centre of the flower. Stop moving, Ellie. But you don't want to press until you get to the petal point. So you want to do that sweep, gets about here, and that stem goes in. Isn't that lovely? So that is literally it. And you can do multiples of these across the page. Now I am aware that I'm doing this on slightly larger paper. I just need a little bit more space sometimes when I'm painting. Sometimes I paint on massive A1 sheets, so this is quite small for me. But if you do end up doing a larger study that's outside of your sketchbook, the best thing you could possibly do is take a photograph of it and then stick the photograph in your sketchbook if you can't fit the whole study in. I may still be able to trim this down to size, so let's see. And then from here I want to start to add some leaves, so I'm coming from the stem and pulling up. I'll do the same on the other side but a bit lower down. And then from there we can start to add some of those lovely fractal patterns that come out of these lovely, beautiful, soft and delicate leaves. So that's it. That is the wild chamomile study. That one's purely painted. It's on 300 GSM rough texture paper. Something for you to experiment with, and don't forget that all the colours I've used, all the materials I've used will be on the slide in the resources, so you can have a look at those if you need a little bit of guidance, if you've forgotten what I said at the beginning by the time I got to the end of this exercise. But that's it, size 6 brush, just a really small selection of colours, working wet on wet, especially when we're doing the top of the flower, and then something grey, like a really washed out Payne's grey with a little bit of green that you're already using on the stem works well. Or, if you've got the subscription box, Shadow Violet, which is exactly why it's in there. It's such a great colour. Okay? So how did you get on, my friends? I really hope you enjoyed this first cycle of the season. There's a lot there already for you to sort of integrate, and perhaps you can use some of the techniques that we've explored today to have a look at some of the other things that are growing on your local patch and have a go at sketching them. No pressure though. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, there are other plants in the daisy family which are of sort of high value in terms of their medicinal use. And I will be looking to weave more of those plants into cycle 2. I'll also be offering you some tips and techniques for working up a drawing from a sort of pencil study into adding fine liner and working with line and dotting and those kind of things. So that's all coming up in cycle 2. And as I said at the beginning of this tutorial, make sure you leave a little bit of space. Maybe you'll want to sort of press some of the plants as they appear and keep a sort of pressed version in your sketchbook. Maybe once they appear, you want to pick a physical sample and come back and revisit some of the exercises that we've covered today. So this is a journey that sort of moves in lots of different directions. You know, it gives you skills to then be able to tackle other things that are in your surroundings. And I hope you will find some of the techniques that I shared today and over the coming weeks to be really empowering. Please do make sure if you're on Instagram or Facebook that you give us a tag so we can see some of the work that you are producing in your own space. And obviously if you're in the community group or in the free Facebook group, you're welcome to share your studies there, and I will pop in when I can and give you feedback. So yes, this is a really gentle and mellow sign off to the first cycle of the season looking at chamomile, and I will see you in a couple of weeks' time. So much love.